Chapter 7. Sakshatkara. Realization. In the foregoing chapters it was said that direct knowledge must first be gained and then the latent tendencies of the mind wiped out so that Brahman may be realized. Now, realization is dealt with. The Master says, "Wise son, now that you have gained direct knowledge by inquiry into the self, you should proceed with meditation." "Master, now that I have gained direct knowledge by inquiry and my task is finished, why should I meditate further, and to what end?" Though by reflection direct knowledge of the self has been gained, Brahman cannot be realized without meditation. In order to experience I am Brahman, you must practice meditation. You ask me to pursue meditation for realizing Brahman. I have already gained direct knowledge by inquiry into the sacred text. Why should I now practice meditation? If you mean to say that inquiry into the sacred text results in realizing Brahman, who can deny it? No one. Truly, this inquiry must end in the realization of Brahman. Let us now inquire into the meaning of the text. Whose identity with whom is implied in it? It must be of the consciousness witnessing the 5 shis of the individual, the implied meaning of thou with Brahman, the implied meaning of that. It cannot be the jiva, i.e. the personal soul, with Brahman. By inquiry, the identity of the witnessing consciousness with Brahman has certainly been found. Of what use can this identity of the witness with Brahman be to you? On inquiry into the meaning of the sacred text, when one has realized that the witness is Brahman and vice versa, how can you raise the question of what use can it be to the person? Its use is evident. Formerly the seeker was ignorant of the identity, and now, by inquiry, he is aware of it. By inquiry, you have certainly known that the witness is Brahman, and that the unbroken, all-perfect Brahman is the witness. Still, this knowledge is not the end and cannot serve your purpose. Suppose a poor beggar who was ignorant of the fact that a king residing in a fort was the emperor of the world, later knew it. How does this newly acquired knowledge improve his position? It cannot serve any useful purpose for him. Before inquiry, ignorance prevails. After inquiry, knowledge is gained that the witness is Brahman. Now knowledge has taken the place of ignorance. This is the use. How does this affect the fact? Whether you have known it or not, the witness ever remains Brahman. Your knowledge of the fact has not made Brahman the witness. Whether the poor beggar knew it or not, the king in the fort was the emperor. His knowledge did not make an emperor of the king in the fort. Now that you have known the witness to be Brahman, what has happened to you? Tell me. There can be no change in you. Why not? There is a difference. The sacred text teaches that thou art. On inquiring into its significance, I have found that the witness of the 5 shis in me is the same as Brahman. From this I have known that I am Brahman, which forms another sacred text. To me, who is ignorant of the witness being the same as Brahman, this knowledge has dawned with the result that I have realized Brahman. How can you claim to have realized Brahman? If by the text I am Brahman you understand yourself to be Brahman, who is this I but the jiva, the individual soul, or the ego? How can the ego be Brahman? Just as even with his knowledge of the king the beggar cannot himself be the king, so also the changeful ego can never be identical with the changeless Brahman. Certainly so, but on inquiring who am I, it becomes plain that by non-inquiry the unchanging witness had mistaken the changing ego for himself. Now he knows I am not the changing ego, but remain its unchanging conscious witness. Now it is but right that the witness should say, I am Brahman. What can be discordant in this? How can you hold that the witness says, I am Brahman? Does the unchanging witness or the changing ego say so? If you say that it is the witness, you are wrong. For the witness remains unchanging as the witness of the false I. He is not the conceit itself. Otherwise, he cannot have the quality of being the witness, for he will himself be changing. Being unchanging, the witness is free from the least trace of any notion, such as I or Brahman, and cannot therefore know I am Brahman. There is no ground for your contention that the witness says so. Then who knows I am Brahman? From what has been said before, it must follow that the individual soul, the jiva or the false I, must have this knowledge. How does this follow? In order to be free from the repeated cycle of births and deaths, the ignorant man is obliged to practice the knowledge I am Brahman. There is no ignorance for the witness. When there is no ignorance, there can be no knowledge either. Only the ignorant must seek knowledge. Who but the false I can be the subject of ignorance or of knowledge? It is self-evident that the witnessing self, being the substratum on which the knowledge or ignorance appears, must itself be free from them. On the contrary, the false I is known to possess knowledge or ignorance. If you ask him, do you know the self witnessing you? And he will answer, who is that witness? I do not know him. Here, the ignorance of the false I is obvious. On hearing the Vedanta that there is an inner witness to him, indirectly he knows that the self is his witness. Then, inquiring into the self, the veil of ignorance, that it does not shine forth, is drawn off, and directly he knows the witnessing self. Here again the knowledge of the false I is also clear. It is only the jiva and not the witness who has the knowledge or ignorance that there is or is not the inner witness. You must now admit that the jiva has the knowledge that I am Brahman. Now, for the reason that the changing jiva has become aware of the unchanging witness, he cannot be the same as the witness, because he has seen him. The poor beggar cannot be the king. So also the changing jiva cannot be the witness. Without being the witnessing self, the changing entity cannot be Brahman. So this experience, I am Brahman, is impossible. How can you say that merely seeing the witness, I cannot know that I am the witness? Ignorant of his true being as the substratum or the witnessing consciousness, the jiva moves about as the false I. However, on a careful inquiry into his true nature, he knows the witness and identifies himself as the witness who is well known to be the unbroken, all-perfect Brahman. Thus the experience, I am Brahman, is real. What you say is true, provided that the jiva can identify himself as the witness. The witness is undoubtedly Brahman. But how can the mere sight of the witness help the jiva merge himself into the witness? Unless the jiva remains the witness, he cannot know himself as the witness. Merely by seeing the king, a poor beggar cannot know himself to be the king. But when he becomes the king, he can know himself as the king. Similarly, the jiva, remaining changeful and without becoming the unchanging witness, cannot know himself as the witness. If he cannot be the witness, how can he be the unbroken, all-perfect Brahman? He cannot be. Just as at the sight of the king in a fort, a poor beggar cannot become king and much less sovereign of the universe, so also only at the sight of the witness who is much finer than ether and free from traffic with triads, such as the knower, knowledge, and the known, eternal, pure, aware, free, real, supreme, and blissful, the jiva cannot become the witness, much less the unbroken, all-perfect Brahman, and cannot know I am Brahman. If so, how is it that the two words of the same case, ending samanadhikarana, I and Brahman, are placed in apposition in the sacred text I am Brahman? According to grammatical rules, the Shruti clearly proclaims the same rank to the jiva and Brahman. How is this to be explained? The common agreement between two words in apposition is of two kinds, muktaya and badha, i.e., unconditional and conditional. Here the Shruti does not convey the unconditional meaning. What is this unconditional meaning? The ether in a jar has the same characteristics as that in another jar, or in a room, or in the open. Therefore the one ether is the same as the other. Similarly with air, fire, water, earth, sunlight, etc. Again, the God in one image is the same as that in another, and the witnessing consciousness in one being is the same as that in another. The Shruti does not mean this kind of identity between the jiva and Brahman, but means the other, the conditional meaning. What is it? Discarding all appearances, the sameness of the substratum in all. Please explain this. I am Brahman means that after discarding the false I, only the residual being or the pure consciousness that is left over can be Brahman. It is absurd to say that without discarding but retaining the individuality, the jiva, unseeing Brahman but not becoming Brahman, can know himself as Brahman. A poor beggar must first cease to be a beggar and rule over a state in order to know himself as king. A man desirous of godhood first drowns himself in the Ganges, and leaving this body becomes himself a celestial being. By this extraordinary one-pointed devotion, a devotee leaves off his body and merges into God, before he can know himself to be God. In all these cases, when the beggar knows himself to be king, or the man to be celestial being, or the devotee to be God, they cannot retain their former individualities and also identify themselves as the superior beings. In the same way, the seeker of liberation must first cease to be an individual before he can rightly say, I am Brahman. This is the significance of the sacred text. Without completely losing one's individuality, one cannot be Brahman. Therefore, to realize Brahman, the loss of individuality is a sine qua non. The changeful individual soul cannot be Brahman. Even though he rids himself of the individuality, how can he become Brahman? Just as a maggot, losing its nature, becomes a wasp, a maggot is brought by a wasp and kept in its hive. From time to time, the wasp visits the hive and stings the maggot so that it always remains in dread of its tormentor. The constant thought of the wasp transforms the maggot into a wasp. Similarly, constantly meditating on Brahman, the seeker loses his original nature and becomes himself Brahman. This is a realization of Brahman. This cannot illustrate the point, for the jiva is changing and falsely presented on the pure being, Brahman, which is reality. When a false thing has lost its falsity, the whole entity is gone. How can it become reality? Your doubt how a superimposed falsity turns out to be its substratum, the reality, is easily cleared. See how the nacre silver ceases to be silver and remains as nacre, or a rope snake ceasing to be snake remains ever as rope. Similarly with the jiva superimposed on the reality, Brahman. These are illusions which are not conditioned, nirupadhika, Brahma, whereas the appearance of the jiva is conditioned, sopadika Brahma, and appears as a superimposition only on the internal faculty, the mind. So long as there is the mind, there will also be the jiva or the individual, and the mind is the result of past karma. As long as this remains, unexhausted, the jiva must also be present. Just as the reflection of one's face is contingent upon the mirror or water in front, so is individuality on the mind, the effect of one's past karma. How can this individuality be done away with? Undoubtedly, individuality lasts as long as the mind exists, just as the reflected image disappears with the removal of the mirror in front, so also individuality can be effaced by stilling the mind by meditation. The individuality being thus lost, the jiva becomes void. Having become void, how can he become Brahman? The jiva is only a false appearance not apart from its substratum. It is conditional on ignorance, or the mind, on whose removal the jiva is left as the substratum, as in the case of a dream person. How? The waking man functions as the dreamer, tejasa, in his dreams. The dreamer is neither identical with nor separate from the waking man, visva, for the man sleeping happy on his bed has not moved out, whereas the dreamer, he had wandered about in other places, busy with many things. The wanderer of the dream cannot be the man resting in his bed. Can he then be different? Not so either, for on waking from sleep, he says, "In my dream I went to so many places, did so many things, and was happy or otherwise." Clearly he identifies himself with the experiencer of the dream. Moreover, no other experiencer can be seen. Not different from nor identical with the waking experiencer, who is this dream experiencer. Being a creation of the illusory power of sleep, the dream experiencer is only an illusion, like the snake on a rope. With the finish of the illusory power of dream, the dreamer vanishes only to wake up as the real substratum, the original individual self of the waking state. Similarly, the empirical self, the jiva, is neither the unchanging Brahman nor other than it. In the internal faculty, the mind fancied by ignorance, the self is reflected, and the reflection presents itself as the empirical, changing, and individual self. This is a superimposed false appearance. Since the superimposition cannot remain apart from its substratum, this empirical self cannot be other than the absolute self. Who is this? Successively appearing in the ignorance-created mind and disappearing in deep sleep, swoon, etc., this empirical self is inferred to be only a phantom. Simultaneously with the disappearance of the medium or the limiting adjunct, upadhi, the mind, the jiva becomes the substratum, the true being or Brahman. Destroying the mind, the jiva can know himself as Brahman. With the destruction of the limiting adjunct, the jiva being lost, how can he say, "I am Brahman"? When the limiting ignorance of dream vanishes, the dreamer is not lost, but emerges as the waking experiencer. So also when the mind is lost, the jiva emerges as his true being, Brahman. Therefore, as soon as the mind is annihilated, leaving no trace behind, the jiva will surely realize, "I am the being, knowledge, bliss, non-dual Brahman. Brahman is I, the self." In that case, the state must be without any mode like that of deep sleep. How can there be the experience, "I am Brahman"? Just as at the end of a dream, the dreamer rising up as the waking experiencer says, "All along I was dreaming that I wandered in strange places, etc., but I am only lying down on the bed." Or a madman, cured of his madness, remains pleased with himself. Or a patient, cured of his illness, wonders at his past sufferings. Or a poor man, on becoming a king, forgets or laughs at his past penurious state, or a man on becoming a celestial being enjoys the new bliss, or a devotee on uniting with the Lord of his devotion remains blissful, so also the jiva on emerging as Brahman wonders how all along, being only Brahman, he was moving about as a helpless being, imagining a world, God, and individuals, asks himself what became of all these fancies, and how he now, remaining all alone as being knowledge bliss, free from any differentiation, internal or external, certainly experiences the supreme bliss of Brahman. Thus, realization is possible for the jiva only on the complete destruction of the mind and not otherwise. Experience can be of the mind only. When it is destroyed, who can have the experience, I am Brahman? You are right. The destruction of the mind is of two kinds, rupa and arupa, i.e., in its form aspect and in its formless aspect. All this while I have been speaking of destroying the former mind. Only when it ceases to be in its formless aspect, experience will be impossible, as you say. Please explain these two forms of mind and their destruction. The latent impressions, vasanas, manifesting as modes, vrittis, constitute the form aspect of the mind. Their effacement is the destruction of this aspect of mind. On the other hand, on the latencies perishing, the supervening state of samadhi in which there is no stupor of sleep, no vision of the world, but only the being knowledge bliss, is the formless aspect of mind. The loss of this amounts to the loss of the formless aspect of mind. Should this also be lost, there can be no experience, not even of the realization of supreme bliss. When does this destruction take place? In the disembodiment of the liberated being. It cannot happen so long as he is alive in the body. The mind is lost in its form aspect, but not in its formless one of Brahman. Hence the experience of bliss for the sage, liberated while alive. In brief, what is realization? To destroy the mind in its form aspect, functioning as the limiting adjunct to the individual, to recover the pure mind in its formless aspect whose nature is only being, knowledge, bliss, and to experience I am Brahman is realization. Is this view supported by others as well? Yes, Sri Sankaracharya has said, just as in the ignorant state, unmindful of the identity of the self with Brahman, one truly believes oneself to be the body. So also, after knowing to be free from the illusion of the body being the self, and becoming unaware of the body, undoubtingly and unmistakably, always, to experience the self as the being knowledge bliss, identical with Brahman, is called realization. To be fixed as the real self is realization, say the sages. Who says it and where? Vasishtha has said in Yoga Vasishtha, just as the mind in a stone remains quiet and without any mode, so also like the interior of the stone, to remain without any mode and thought-free, but not in the slumber, not aware of duality, is to be fixed as the real self. Therefore, without effacing the form aspect of the mind and remaining fixed as the true self, how can anyone realize I am Brahman? It cannot be. Briefly put, one should still the mind to destroy one's individuality and thus remain fixed as the real self of being, knowledge, bliss, so that in accordance with the text, I am Brahman, one can realize Brahman. On the other hand, on the strength of the direct knowledge of Brahman, to say, I am Brahman is as silly as a poor beggar on seeing the king. declaring himself to be the king. Not to claim by words, but to be fixed as the real self and know I am Brahman, is realization of Brahman. How would the sage be who has undoubtingly, unmistakably, and steadily realized Brahman? Always remaining as the being knowledge bliss, non-dual, all perfect, all alone, unitary Brahman, he will be unshaken even while experiencing the results of the past karma now in fruition, prarabdha. Being only Brahman, how can he be subject to the experiences and activities resulting from past karma? For the sage, undoubtingly and unmistakably fixed as the real self, there can remain no past karma. In its absence, there can be no fruition, consequently no experience, nor any activity. Being only without mode Brahman, there can be no experiencer, no experiences, and no objects of experience. Therefore no past karma can be said to remain for him. Why should we not say that his past karma is now working itself out? Who is the questioner? He must be a deluded being and not a sage. Why? Experience implies delusion. Without the one, the other cannot be. Unless there is an object, no experience is possible. All objective knowledge is delusion. There is no duality in Brahman. Certainly all names and forms are by ignorance superimposed on Brahman. Therefore the experiencer must be ignorant only and not a sage, having already inquired into the nature of things and known them to be illusory names and forms born of ignorance. The sage remains fixed as Brahman and knows all to be only Brahman. Who is to enjoy what? No one and nothing. Therefore there is no past karma left, nor present enjoyments, nor any activity for the wise one. However, we do not see him free from the experience of past karma. On the other hand, he goes through them like an ordinary ignorant man. How is this to be explained? In his view, there is nothing like past karma, enjoyments, or activities. What is his view? For him, there is nothing but the pure, untainted ether of absolute knowledge. But how is he seen to pass through experiences? Only the others see him so. He is not aware of it. Is this view confirmed by other authorities? In Viveka-Chudamani, Sri Acharya has said, simultaneous with the dawn of knowledge, ignorance with all its effects flees away from the sage, so he cannot be an enjoyer. However, the ignorant wonder how the sage continues to live in the body and act like others. From the ignorant point of view, the scriptures have admitted the momentum of past karma, but not from the point of view of the sage himself. If truly he is no enjoyer, why should he appear to others to be so? Owing to their ignorance, the others regard him as an enjoyer. Can this be so? Yes, to the ignorant only the non-dual pure ether of absolute knowledge manifests itself as various beings, the world, God, different names and forms, I, you, he, it, this, and that. Like the illusion of a man on a post, silver on nacre, snake on rope, utensils in clay, or ornaments in gold. Different names and forms on the ether of knowledge delude the ignorant. The sage, who by practice of knowledge has destroyed ignorance and gained true knowledge, will always remain only as the ether of absolute knowledge, unaware of enjoyments of fruits of actions or of worldly activities. Being that, he can be aware as the ether of knowledge only. Nevertheless, owing to their ignorance, others see him otherwise, i.e., as an embodied being acting like themselves. But he remains only pure, untainted ether without any activity. Can it be illustrated how the sage remaining himself inactive appears active to others? Two friends sleep side by side. One of them reposes in dreamless sleep, whereas the other dreams that he is wandering about with his friend. Though in complete repose, this man appears active to the dreamer. Similarly, although the sage remains inactive as the blissful ether of absolute knowledge, he appears to be active to those who in ignorance remain always caught up in names and forms. It must now be clear that the realized sage, being the pure self, is not involved in action, but only appears to be so. Not that there are no experiences whatever for the realized sage, but they are only illusory. For knowledge can destroy the karma already stored and the future karma, sanchita and agamya, but not the karma which, having already begun to bear fruit, prarabdha, must exhaust itself. As long as it is there, even from his point of view, activities will persist, though illusory. This cannot be. In which state do these three kinds of karma exist? Knowledge or ignorance? Owing to delusion, it must be said they are operative only in ignorance. But in knowledge, there being no delusion, there is no prarabdha, always remaining undiluted as the transcendental self. How can the delusion of the fruition of karma occur to one? Can the delusion of dream experience return to him who has awakened from it? To the disillusioned sage, there can be no experience of karma. Always he remains unaware of the world, but aware of the self as the non-dual, unbroken, unitary, solid, without any mode, ether of absolute knowledge, and nothing besides. The Upanishad admits past karma in the text, as long as his past karma is not exhausted, the sage cannot be disembodied, and there will be illusory activities for him. You are not right. The activities and experiences of the fruits of action and the world seem illusory to the practicer of knowledge, and they completely vanish to the accomplished sage. The practicer practices as follows. I am the witness. The objects and activities are seen by and known to me. I remain conscious, and these are insentient. Only Brahman is real. All else is unreal. The practice ends with the realization that all these are insentient, consisting of names and forms, and cannot exist in the past, present, or future. Therefore they vanish. There being nothing to witness, witnessing ends by merging into Brahman. Only the self is now left over as Brahman. For the sage, aware of the self only, there can remain only Brahman and no thought of karma or worldly activities. Why then does the Shruti mention past karma in this connection? It does not refer to the accomplished sage. Whom does it refer to? Only to the ignorant. Why? Although from his own point of view, the sage has no enjoyment of the fruits of actions, yet the ignorant are deluded on seeing his activities. Even if told there is no enjoyment for him, the ignorant will not accept it but continue to doubt how the sage remains active. To remove such doubt, the Shruti says to the ignorant that prarabdha still remains for the sage. But it does not say to the sage, you have prarabdha. Therefore, the Shruti, which speaks of residual prarabdha for the sage, really does not speak it from his point of view. Realization can result only after complete annihilation of individuality. But who will agree to sacrifice his individuality? Being eager to cross over the ocean of the misery of repeated births and deaths and realize the pure, eternal Brahman, one will readily sacrifice one's individuality, just as the man, desirous of becoming a celestial being, willingly consigns himself to the fire or the Ganges, in order to end this human life and emerge as a god, so also the seeker of liberation will, by practice of sravana, manana, and nidhyayasana, i.e., hearing, reflection, and meditation, sacrifices individuality to become the Supreme Brahman. Here ends the chapter on realization. Diligently studying and understanding this, the seeker will kill the mind, which is the limiting adjunct that causes individuality to manifest and ever live as Brahman only. Chapter 8. Manonasa, the extinction of the mind. In the previous chapter, having taught the realization of the non-dual Brahman, the Master now treats of the extinction of the mind as the sole means of realizing Brahman. Wise son, leave off the mind, which is the limiting adjunct giving rise to individuality, thus causing the great malady of repeated births and deaths, and realize Brahman. Master, how can the mind be extinguished? Is it not very hard to do so? Is not the mind very powerful, restive, and ever vacillating? How can one relinquish the mind? To give up the mind is very easy as crushing a delicate flower, or removing a hair from butter, or winking your eyes. Doubt it not, for a self-possessed, resolute seeker not bewitched by the senses, but by strong dispassion grown indifferent to external objects, there cannot be the least difficulty in giving up the mind. How is it so easy? The question of difficulty arises only if there is a mind to leave off. Truly speaking, there is no mind. When told there is a ghost here, an ignorant child is deluded into believing the existence of the non-existent ghost, and is subject to fear, misery, and troubles. Similarly, in the untainted Brahman, by fancying things that are not, as this and that, a false entity known as the mind arises seemingly real, functioning as this and that, and proving uncontrollable and mighty to the unwary, whereas to the self-possessed, discerning seeker who knows its nature, it is easy to relinquish. Only a fool, ignorant of its nature, says it is most difficult. What is the nature of mind? To think this and that. In the absence of thought, there can be no mind. On the thoughts being extinguished, the mind will remain only in name, like the horn of a hare. It will vanish as a non-entity like a barren woman's son, or a hare's horn, or a flower in the sky. This is also mentioned in the Yoga Vasista. How? Vasista says, "Listen, O Rama, there is nothing to speak of as mind. Just as the ether exists without form, so also the mind exists as the blank insentience. It remains only in name. It has no form. It is not outside, nor is it in the heart. Yet like ether, the mind, though formless, fills all." How can this be? Wherever thought arises as this and that, there is the mind. If there be mind wherever there is thought, are thought and mind different? Thought is the index of the mind. When a thought arises, mind is inferred. In the absence of thought, there can be no mind. Therefore mind is nothing but thought. Thought is itself mind. What is thought? Thought is imagination. The thought-free state is bliss supreme. Sivasvarupa. Thoughts are of two kinds: the recalling of things experienced and unexperienced. To begin with, please tell me, what is thought? Sages say that it is nothing but to think of any external object as this or that, is or is not, this wise or that wise, etc. How is this to be classified under the heads of things experienced and unexperienced? Of objects of senses such as sound already experienced as I saw, I heard, I touched, etc. To think of them as having been seen, heard, touched, is the recollection of things already experienced. To call to mind unexperienced objects of senses is the thought of unexperienced things. That thoughts pertain to things already experienced is understandable, but how to think of those not so experienced unless they are reminiscences of things already experienced? One can never think of things not experienced. How then can we say to think of things not already experienced as thought? Yes, it is quite possible. To think of things not experienced is also thought. Objects unexperienced appear as such only after thinking. How can the things not already experienced come within the orbit of thought? By the process of positive and negative induction. ADVAITA-BODHA-DEEPIKA. All mental imagery must be said to be thought forms, whether already experienced or not. How do you apply the positive and negative induction here? Whether existent or non-existent, already experienced or not so experienced, whatever and however something is thought of, it is apprehended. The mere thought of it amounts to apprehension. This is the positive induction. Real or unreal, experienced or not, however it may be, whatever is not thought of is not apprehended. This is negative induction. From this process also it follows that thought is apprehension. How can mere thought of anything be its apprehension also? Things are apprehended directly by the senses or by recall of past experiences to the mind. On the other hand, things unheard of or unseen cannot be apprehended by simply thinking of them. Therefore, the logical conclusion that mere thought of anything is its apprehension does not hold. You are not right. Now, can you say that things not directly cognized by the senses are not apprehended? The pleasures of heaven, though not already enjoyed, are vividly pictured in our minds. This is owing to our knowledge of the sastras which depict them. Though not experienced, they appear to us as delights, not experienced. Things experienced can be thought of and cognized, but things unexperienced cannot be cognized even if thought of. Now listen. Experienced or unexperienced things can be cognized. As things already experienced at a distant place are thought of and cognized, so also things unexperienced can be thought of and cognized on hearing from others, such as the Mount Meru of bright gold. Though eyes and ears are closed, yet visions and sounds can be thought of and cognized. Though in dark, one can still think of an object and cognize it. Even without eyes and ears, the blind and the deaf cognize forms and sounds on thinking of them. Therefore, already known or unknown, all that is thought of can be apprehended. This is the affirmative proposition. What is negation? In the absence of mind, in swoons, deep sleep, or trance, there is no thinking, and consequently nothing is seen. Not only in these states, but also in waking, if one does not think, there is no phenomenon. Even in waking it cannot be so. Objects of direct cognition, even if not thought of, are apprehended. No, what you say is not true. Everyday experience teaches us otherwise. How? When a man is keenly attentive to something, he does not answer when someone calls. Later he says, I was intent on something else. I could not hear, I could not see, I was not aware, etc. It is therefore clear that without attention, objects of direct cognition cannot be apprehended. Cannot the objects of direct cognition be apprehended without attention? Though in direct contact with the senses, objects cannot be cognized without attention to them. Though the necklace is in contact with the body, because the wearer is not attentive, its presence is not known. Being unaware of it, she even misses the ornament and searches for it. Though in touch with the body of the wearer, the necklace is missed for want of attention. Again, a patient writhing with pain can be made to forget it by drawing his attention to something else. Similarly, the grief of bereavement is forgotten by attention being directed to other matters of interest. It is obvious that without attention, even the objects of direct cognition cannot be recognized. From this it follows that the cognition of anything experienced or not, however it may be, can only be of the form of thought. Therefore the perception of things has been signified by various terms in Vedanta, such as cognition as this and that, will, thought, mode of mind, intellect, latency, reflected consciousness, the heart knot, the scene, illusion, the individual, the world, the all, God, etc. Where has it been said that this knowledge is the all? On the other hand, it is said that Maya became the all. Yes, Maya is the knowledge which is spoken of. Only this objective knowledge goes under the different names Maya, avidya, bondage, impurity, darkness, ignorance, the mind, the cycles of repeated births and deaths, etc. Be it so, what has this got to do with the extinction of the mind? Listen, you must understand that the knowledge signified by all these terms is only the mind. Who else says so? Vasista has said to Rama, whatever objective knowledge manifests as this and that, or not this and not that, or in any other manner, it is only the mind. The mind is nothing but this manifest knowledge. Let it be so. How can the mind be extinguished? To forget everything is the ultimate means. But for thought, the world does not arise. Do not think, and it will not arise. When nothing arises in the mind itself is lost. Therefore, do not think of anything, forget all. This is the best way to kill the mind. Has anyone else said so before? Vasista said so to Rama thus, efface all thoughts of all kinds of things enjoyed, not enjoyed, or otherwise, like wood or stone, remain free from thoughts. So Rama said, should I altogether forget everything? And Vasista replied, exactly, altogether forget everything and remain like wood or stone. Rama, well, the result will be dullness like that of stones or wood. And said Vasista, not so. All this is only illusion. Forgetting the illusion, you are freed from it. Though seeming dull, you will be the bliss itself. Your intellect will be altogether clear and sharp, without getting entangled in worldly life, but appearing active to others, remain as the very bliss of Brahman and be happy. Unlike the blue color of the sky, let not the illusion of the world revive in the pure ether of consciousness self. To forget this illusion is the sole means to kill the mind and remain as bliss. Though Siva, Vishnu, or Brahman himself should instruct you, realization is not possible without this one means. Without forgetting everything, fixity as the self is impossible. Therefore, altogether forget everything. Is it not very difficult to do so? Though for the ignorant it is difficult, for the discerning few it is very easy. Never think of anything but the unbroken, unique Brahman. By a long practice of this, you will easily forget the non-self. It cannot be difficult to remain still without thinking anything. Let not thoughts arise in the mind. Always think of Brahman. In this way, all worldly thoughts will vanish, and thought of Brahman alone will remain. When this becomes steady, forget even this, and without thinking, I am Brahman, be the very Brahman. This cannot be difficult to practice. Now, my wise son, follow this advice, cease thinking of anything but Brahman. By this practice your mind will be extinct. You will forget all and remain as pure Brahman. He who studies this chapter and follows the instructions contained therein will soon be Brahman itself.